At 0940 hours, just 500 feet above the Pacific Ocean, a C-17 Globemaster roars through turbulent winds. In the cockpit, the pilot locks his eyes on an almost invisible mark below, a 560-foot nuclear submarine reduced to a pencil line in an ocean that stretches wider than Russia. The mission sounds impossible. The C-17 is no sleek fighter jet. It's a 412,000-pound flying fortress, a cargo behemoth that moves like a building caught in a storm. Yet today, this giant must perform the work of a scalpel. The pilot has exactly one shot to drop a 50-pound package onto a moving target beneath the waves. There is no room for error. Miss by just 50 meters, and 3 years of planning collapse in a single instant. But a direct hit comes with its own nightmare, because that target is not an enemy vessel, it's an American asset. And one mistake could mean explaining to Congress how he just accidentally bombed a $2.1 billion US submarine. The clock is ticking, the ocean waits, and the most dangerous part of the mission has just begun. At 0940 hours, the Globemaster begins its final approach. From 500 feet above the Pacific, the pilot locks eyes on the faint silhouette below. The USS Henry M. Jackson, a 560-foot Trident submarine that looks no larger than a pencil scratch against the rolling ocean. The aircraft lurches in crosswinds, its massive frame fighting every gust like a skyscraper in flight. The pilot knows there's no do-over. One package, one drop. Missed by 50 meters, and 3 years of research collapses into failure. Hit the submarine directly, and he's the man who just accidentally bombed a $2.1 billion nuclear asset. The margin for error, zero. This moment had been set in motion 6 hours earlier. At 0530 hours, the C-17 lifted off from Hickam Air Force Base, 4 Pratt & Whitney PW-200 turbofans, shoving 412,000 pounds of metal and fuel into the dark Hawaiian sky. But this wasn't just another supply run. It was a gamble, a test to prove whether the world's most elusive war machines could be resupplied by air without ever surfacing near land or ports. If it worked, submarines could remain hidden in the depths for months, untouchable, unreachable, yet never out of reach of supplies. But first, the Globemaster had to do the impossible: find the submarine. Somewhere in a search area covering 50 square miles, the Henry M. Jackson had been drifting silently, radio dark, carried by currents like an invisible ghost in the water. Finding it was like spotting a single moving coin in the middle of Manhattan from an aircraft 500 miles above. By 0730 hours, the first break came. A short, encrypted burst transmission, just 1.3 seconds long, blinked across the comms, giving updated coordinates. The Jackson had drifted over 4 nautical miles northeast of her predicted position. Scrambling the flight crew's search grid, it was no mistake. The submarine intentionally varied her drift to avoid creating a track any adversary could predict. A brilliant tactic for evading enemies. A nightmare for the Globemaster crew hunting her from above. In the cargo bay, the test package waited. 50 pounds of supplies wrapped in waterproof seals and strapped into a flotation device that made it look like a suitcase bound for a beach holiday. No GPS tracker, no beacon, no electronics. Just a simple block designed to hit the water, float, and wait for recovery. The logic was brutal in its simplicity. Technology fails. Foam floats. At 0915 hours, radar finally painted a faint, intermittent return. A shape that matched no wave, no debris, no driftwood. The Jackson was here, surfacing just enough to reveal her back to the sky. The black hull broke the surface like a shadow among shadows. To the untrained eye, invisible. To the radar operator, unmistakable. The cockpit went silent as the Globemaster lined up for its run. This was not what the C-17 was built for. It could deliver tanks to runways, paratroopers to drop zones, even humanitarian aid into disaster zones. But dropping a package onto a moving submarine? That had never been tried. The pilot adjusted trim, fighting the crosswinds, every muscle locked in concentration. The ocean below heaved and swelled. The submarine shifted. The digital clock in the cockpit ticked down, 30 seconds to release. What happened next would decide whether this experiment rewrote the book on submarine warfare or vanished into military archives as a very expensive lesson in overconfidence. At 0938 hours, the cockpit turns into a world of controlled chaos. The flight engineer's voice cuts through the headset. Speed holding, altitude drifting low, correct 2 feet, heading steady. The pilot's hands grip the yoke with the pressure of someone trying to hold back an avalanche. Every muscle move is amplified through 170 feet of wingspan, each correction pushing against Pacific winds that don't care about human schedules or military experiments. In the cargo bay, the loadmaster locks eyes on the target zone through the door window. The submarine holds her line, 560 feet of black steel carving a path through swells like a shadowed blade. Off her beam, the RIB bobs violently, sailors bracing themselves against walls of water while watching the skies. Every second feels like an eternity, the coordination thread stretched thin between three platforms that cannot afford even a single misstep. At 0939 hours and 30 seconds, the pilot makes the final call. Stand by, release in 5. The C-17 holds its breath. Every alarm, every warning, every ounce of training converges on this one instant. But if this works, it could rewrite the way submarines operate forever. Finding the submarine was just step one. Now came the part that made even experienced pilots sweat. At 0925 hours, the C-17 begins what the crew generously calls a descent. In reality, it feels more like wrestling a building through the air. At just 500 feet above the Pacific, the aircraft no longer behaves like a plane. It wallows and lurches like a 412,000-pound aluminum whale with attitude problems. The pilot eases back the throttles and instantly understands why every manual screams, "Never fly this low over open water." The C-17 reacts to inputs the way a dump truck might if someone tried to race it at the Indy 500. Slow, heavy, uncooperative. Below them, the USS Henry M. Jackson breaks through the swells. 560 feet of black steel carving across the Pacific. Sleek, deadly, built to vanish beneath the ocean, now serving as a target no wider than a two-lane road. Both platforms are moving. The sea itself is restless, and the situation looks less like a military exercise and more like trying to throw darts during an earthquake. And it only gets worse from here. The invisible force of ground effect kicks in, turning the final approach into a fight with physics. Flying this low compresses air between wing and water, creating strange pockets of lift. 1 second, the aircraft descends smoothly, then suddenly it balloons upward as though a trampoline has been shoved beneath it. The submarine crew isn't having an easier time. Holding a steady position on the surface demands a constant balancing act, adjusting ballast tanks, trimming systems, and just enough propulsion to resist the Pacific's currents, all while avoiding a wake that might scream, "Submarine here," to any enemy satellites overhead. Every few seconds, sailors are shifting water between tanks, fighting the swells that want to turn their billion-dollar boat into the world's most expensive seesaw. And then there's the RIB, the rigid-hull inflatable boat launched from the sub. 4 sailors in a 7-meter craft bouncing across waves, tasked with retrieving the package without colliding with either the submarine or the lumbering aircraft above them. Their job requires the kind of precision usually reserved for video game players, only the stakes here are infinitely higher. Radio chatter connects all 3 units, the C-17, the submarine, the RIB. The sub passes heading and speed updates every 30 seconds. The RIB crew shouts positions as waves toss them around, making accuracy almost impossible. And above them, the C-17 pilots juggle angles and speed, fighting to keep the aircraft steady. For the pilot, holding exactly 120 knots becomes the obsession. Faster, and the package overshoots by hundreds of meters. Slower, and the plane flirts with stall speed. A nightmare scenario when flying a heavy strategic airlifter just 500 feet above the ocean. The margin for error? 0. At this altitude, even a slight bump of turbulence feels like riding a mechanical bull strapped to rocket engines. The C-17's fly-by-wire system, designed for high-altitude precision, is practically useless here. It's like asking a Formula One race car to plow a muddy field. It technically works, but every second feels wrong. Then comes the practice run. The submarine glides directly beneath the transport, allowing everyone to confirm timing and coordination. The loadmaster, staring out a small crew door window, watches in awe as nearly 19,000 tons of submarine steel slides past close enough to pick out sailors on deck. The sight is breathtaking and terrifying, because now everyone fully understands. Miss the drop, and best case, the package is lost forever. Worst case, they've just dropped 50 pounds of failure directly onto a US nuclear submarine. The sight drives home just how impossibly precise this mission must be. Miss the drop zone, and best case, the package vanishes into the Pacific depths. Worst case, you've just answered the unasked question of why no one has dared attempt this before. By slamming 50 pounds of experimental gear onto a nuclear submarine worth $2.1 billion. There are no do-overs, no excuses. Everything rests on the next pass. 3 years of planning now collapse into 5 minutes of execution. At 0935 hours, the C-17 Globemaster levels into its approach. The submarine maintains heading 285 degrees, holding steady at 6 knots. Just fast enough to retain steering authority, yet slow enough to minimize drift. It slices through the Pacific like a blade of steel, but even this giant of the seas is not immune to the ocean's shifting moods. 200 meters off its starboard beam, the RIB positions itself like a shadow, close enough for quick recovery, yet far enough to avoid becoming collateral damage if the package splashes in the wrong place. The 4 sailors aboard, dwarfed by the immensity of submarine and aircraft, grip their handholds tighter. The Pacific swells toss them around like corks, and yet they must remain perfectly positioned. Their mission is simple: grab the package before the ocean does. Inside the C-17, the atmosphere feels heavier than the 412,000 pounds of aircraft pressing against the sky. The loadmaster moves into position by the crew door. The package, just 50 pounds of metal, electronics, and hope, is clipped to the frame with quick-release hardware. Nothing special, just a glorified carabiner. Yet it is the final link in a chain of effort, stretching back 3 years. Through the small window, the loadmaster watches the submarine, its black hull cutting across the gray swells, and begins running through calculations in his head. This is seat-of-the-pants physics. He's not following a computer model. He's eyeballing angles, judging speeds, and calculating a release point on instinct and training. The target zone, a patch of ocean no bigger than a basketball court, moving with the submarine, shifting with the waves, and surrounded by chaos. Up front, the pilots are locked in a duel with precision itself. Airspeed must hold at 120 knots, not 119, not 121. The difference of a single knot could push the drop hundreds of meters off target. Altitude must remain at 500 feet, not 490, not 510. Every foot matters when you're releasing something this small from something this massive. Heading must align perfectly with the submarine's course, because any crossing angle multiplies the difficulty into madness. The flight engineer calls out deviations like a heartbeat monitor, while the pilot makes constant corrections. The C-17 does not cooperate. At this altitude, it handles less like an aircraft and more like a drunken whale, wallowing and fighting against every input. Flying straight and level feels like threading a needle while wearing boxing gloves in a windstorm. The test was over. 3 years of planning, 6 hours of execution, and one impossible shot had ended with a splash in the Pacific. The C-17 turned for home, the submarine slipped beneath the waves, and the RIB crew secured the package that could change the future of naval warfare. What seemed impossible had just been proven possible. The U.S. military had found a way to keep its most secretive and survivable platforms supplied without ever coming into port. Moments like this remind us how thin the margin of error can be, where precision, courage, and sheer determination decide the outcome of years of work. This wasn't just a test, it was a glimpse into the future. If you enjoyed this mission breakdown, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more untold stories from the edge of military history, because this was just one drop, and there are many more to come.